and of course, in a time of great danger, and we do have a global emergency.
The world was sleepwalking into disaster until one man grabbed the microphone and demanded we wake up. Former U.S. Vice President Al Gore didn't just talk about climate change, he made us feel it. He took an issue buried in scientific reports and transformed it into a global emergency. But Gore's climate crusade didn't begin with a slideshow. It started decades earlier in the corridors of Washington, where he fought an uphill battle against skeptics, politicians, and even his own party. Act 1. The early warnings. In the late 1970s, a young Al Gore, then a newly elected congressman from Tennessee, came across a series of scientific reports that would change the course of his life. The findings were alarming. Carbon dioxide levels in the atmosphere were steadily rising, average global temperatures were increasing, and scientists were beginning to draw a direct link between human activity and climate change. For Gore, these warnings struck a chord. He had always been fascinated by science, and his time as a student at Harvard had exposed him to the pioneering work of Dr. Roger Revelle, one of the first scientists to raise concerns about the long-term effects of carbon emissions. Revelle's research showed that the burning of fossil fuels was not just an environmental concern, but a planetary crisis in the making. Now, years later, Gore saw that the problem had only grown worse, and yet almost no one was paying attention. To most Americans, the idea of a human-driven climate catastrophe sounded like something out of a science fiction novel. The economy was struggling, the Cold War dominated foreign policy, and the recent oil embargoes had shifted political focus toward energy independence, not sustainability. When Gore brought up the issue with his colleagues, many dismissed it as theoretical, unproven, or simply not urgent. The fossil fuel industry, deeply entrenched in both the economy and political system, had little interest in confronting the problem. The media, focused on immediate crises, largely ignored the growing body of scientific evidence. But Gore was relentless. He threw himself into the research, reaching out to leading climate scientists and absorbing their findings. The numbers painted a grim picture. Carbon dioxide levels had been climbing steadily since the Industrial Revolution. Global temperatures were rising in tandem, and without intervention, the consequences could be catastrophic. He learned about the greenhouse effect, ocean acidification, and the potential for extreme weather patterns that could devastate communities around the world. Determined to make a difference, Gore began speaking out, but his warnings often fell on deaf ears. He held congressional hearings on climate science, inviting experts to testify about the growing crisis. Yet each time, he was met with political resistance. Many lawmakers, backed by the oil and coal industries, refused to acknowledge the problem. Lobbyists worked tirelessly to discredit the science, arguing that the climate had always fluctuated naturally and that there was no proof of human involvement. Even within his own party, Gore found that few were willing to take up the cause. Despite this, he refused to back down. He used every opportunity to raise awareness, whether in speeches on the House floor, interviews with journalists, or meetings with fellow lawmakers. He warned that if the world failed to act, the consequences would be severe rising sea levels, more frequent and intense hurricanes, widespread droughts, and disruptions to food and water supplies. For years, his efforts seemed futile. The world remained largely indifferent to the warnings of climate scientists. But Gore was undeterred. He believed that the truth could not be ignored forever. What started as a lonely fight in the halls of Congress would, over time, evolve into a global movement, one that would eventually bring climate change to the forefront of political and social consciousness. Though his warnings went unheard for decades, history would prove him right. Act 2. The turning point, an inconvenient truth. Then came the moment that changed everything. In 2006, former U.S. Vice President Al Gore released An Inconvenient Truth, a film that wasn't just a documentary, it was a wake-up call. For years, scientists had warned about climate change, publishing reports and presenting data. But their messages were often buried in technical jargon, lost in political debates, or simply ignored by the masses. Then Gore stepped in. He didn't just explain climate change, he made it personal, urgent, inescapable. Through stunning visuals, undeniable data, and a compelling narrative, An Inconvenient Truth transformed climate change from an abstract scientific theory into a pressing reality. People saw the melting glaciers, the rising sea levels, and the extreme weather patterns in a way they never had before. The film painted a stark picture of a future shaped by inaction, one filled with natural disasters, mass displacement, and irreversible damage to the planet. The impact was immediate and profound. The documentary sparked discussions in classrooms, boardrooms, and government halls around the world. It won an Academy Award for Best Documentary Feature, bringing even more attention to its urgent message. Gore himself received the Nobel Peace Prize in 2007 for his tireless efforts in spreading awareness about the climate crisis. But more importantly, an inconvenient truth achieved what few scientific reports ever could. It made climate change a global conversation. Governments were pressured to act, corporations faced new scrutiny, and ordinary people began rethinking their impact on the planet. It was a turning point, a moment when the world could no longer look away. Act 3, the pushback and the legacy. But with fame came fierce opposition. The moment Al Gore stepped into the global spotlight as the face of climate advocacy, powerful forces began working against him. Fossil fuel companies, fearing the downfall of their empire, poured millions into discrediting his message. They funded smear campaigns, casting doubt on climate science and painting Gore as a fearmonger. Think tanks, backed by oil and coal giants, churned out reports to counter his claims. Climate denial became more than just skepticism. It became a multi-billion-dollar industry, weaponized to protect profits at all costs. Politicians joined the attack, calling him alarmist, a doomsday prophet exaggerating the crisis for personal gain. Talk show hosts mocked him. Critics twisted his words, using every tool at their disposal to undermine his influence. But despite the relentless onslaught, Gore refused to be silenced. He didn't just weather the storm, he pushed forward with even greater urgency. Instead of retreating, he doubled down. He expanded his reach, launching initiatives to train a new generation of climate leaders. His documentary, An Inconvenient Truth, sparked a global conversation, and despite the backlash, it won an Academy Award and reached millions. He invested in renewable energy projects, proving that a greener future wasn't just necessary, it was economically viable. He met with world leaders, pressed for stronger environmental policies, and continued to speak out at every major climate summit. Today, Gore's mission continues. He may no longer be in the White House, but his influence is undeniable. His fingerprints are everywhere, from the ambitious targets set in the Paris Agreement to the rapid growth of wind and solar energy industries. The new wave of climate activists, from Greta Thunberg to grassroots organizers worldwide, cite his work as inspiration. The battle is far from over, but thanks to Gore's relentless advocacy, the world is listening, and the fight for the planet is stronger than ever. Act 4, did he succeed? Al Gore changed the conversation. He turned climate change from a distant scientific theory into a global crisis that demanded action. His documentary, An Inconvenient Truth, shook the world, his speeches reached millions, and his relentless advocacy won him a Nobel Prize. But did he change the outcome? The planet is still warming, the ice caps are still melting. Wildfires rage across continents, hurricanes grow stronger, and sea levels continue to rise. Governments have made promises, industries have pledged reforms, and billions have been invested in renewable energy. Yet fossil fuels remain dominant. Emissions keep climbing, and the warnings he issued decades ago seem more urgent than ever. So, what do you think? Have we done enough to stop climate change? Did Al Gore's efforts truly make a difference, or were they just a wake-up call that went unanswered? We'll leave that question to you. Drop a comment below. Do you think Al Gore's warnings were enough, or is it already too late? Let's hear your thoughts. The inconvenient truth remains, but what happens next is up to us. Like, share, and subscribe to our YouTube channel.